Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. I am your host, Justin Dixon, and today we've got Dan Balcauski on the podcast. He is the founder and chief pricing officer of a company called Product Tranquility, which helps high-volume B2B SaaS CEOs define pricing and packaging for new products. So this is a pretty interesting episode because we dive really deep into some of the things that are challenging kind of mid-sized B2B SaaS companies around their pricing, especially as they continue to grow and go upmarket into different customers. Maybe redefining what their ICP is. So Dan has a ton of knowledge around how to understand what the pricing model should be, really help the companies get their net revenue retention back on track. So if you're in the B2B SaaS world or you're really interested in kind of the dynamics of how SaaS companies price and package their offerings, I think you'll get a lot out of this episode. So let's welcome Dan to the pod. Interested in hearing conversations with private equity leaders, CEOs of private equity-backed companies, and startup entrepreneurs where they share their stories about their career journeys, starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, and the important role that having the right talent plays in building a successful business, then you are in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Dixon. All right, Dan, thank you for being a guest on the podcast. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me, Justin. Excited for a conversation.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right in. Maybe give a little bit of an overview to everybody watching and listening, who you are, where you are, and what you're up to right now.
Yeah, my name is Dan Balcauski. I am the founder, chief pricing officer of Product Tranquility. It's a consulting firm based in Austin, Texas, focused on helping B2B SaaS companies with pricing and packaging. So I spent my entire career in software, starting as an engineer, moving into engineering management, product. And early on, noticed a lot of tech companies obsess over acquiring customers, but neglect retaining them and monetizing them effectively. So this insight crystallized. I had a MBA internship out in Silicon Valley with a successful startup out there. And one of the projects on the CEO's desk was, should they do a freemium offer? So I looked at that for them among a couple different other things that summer. And through my research, uncovered that popular model only works under very specific and surprisingly rare circumstances. And that sort of kicked me off in this direction and bounced around in different roles, product leadership, and somehow got pulled into a bunch of pricing and packaging fires as they came up, even though it wasn't necessarily directly my responsibility. The folks were often like, hey, you've got an MBA, you must know how to do this. Made a lot of mistakes along the way. And now I've taken those lessons learned and have the privilege today of helping B2B SaaS CEOs transform pricing from a confusing liability into a strategic advantage.
So I guess talk more about that, because obviously, on my side of the desk, I do a lot of recruiting for B2B SaaS companies. And so, obviously I don't get into the pricing side of the mix, but I guess how do you decide what is the right pricing, and does that pricing model change as the company grows? Like what maybe got you here won't get you there, kind of a strategy. Because a lot of the clients I work with, when they start out, they're all going after kind of SMB and mid-market, and then they eventually want to grow into the enterprise space if they can't go directly there. So that was a lot of questions in one. So how does that kind of work for you as you kind of get involved with your clients?
Yeah. There's a bunch of nested questions in there. Let me see if I could sort of address them one at a time. So one is on stage. I'll try to handle that second. I think, first of all, when it comes to SaaS pricing, most executives think that what you charge determines your success. In fact, who and how you charge determines your success. So, a couple of examples, in the world of movies. You all remember the old Blockbuster days. You would rent a movie for a number of nights. Netflix came along and said, hey, why do you care how many nights you have? We'll give you 3 DVDs. You keep them as long as you want. When you're done with those, send them back. We'll send you 3 more in your queue. And so their whole idea was, we'll charge you based on the number of movies you want at once. And therefore, that what they're doing there is changing the dimension or the pricing metric from time to number of movies, which is more aligned with how people got value out of the product. And I think we've all haven't been to a Blockbuster in a very, very long time. So we understand the power of that transition of a model. And that had nothing to do with, consumers making a decision of like, well, Blockbuster is cheaper, Netflix is cheaper. It's like, oh no, this thing makes sense. I mean, obviously the convenience factors, I don't have to leave my house, et cetera. But that's often very upfront in the work that I do, is much less on the number and a lot more on how we charge. Also, you mentioned transitioning segments, which is the who. We need to be very clear about who we're going after, because we don't ever price the product, we price the customers. Price and value are intimately linked in my work, and value does not exist in the product. Value, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. Value exists in the mind of the customer. And so we really want to make sure that we're clear on our positioning. I'm a big believer that your pricing and packaging is a function of your positioning, and your positioning will define who you're going after, because that will determine the situation that they're in, the context. As an example, let's use the world's number one commodity, water, which is I'm on a road trip with my family. I stop at a gas station. I open up the fridge section to get a bottle of water. I might expect to pay $1, $2 for that bottle of water. But if I've been wandering in the Sahara or Mojave for a week, I might be willing to pay a heck of a lot more, because it's a very different context, very different situation. Or if I've got water blowing out from my pipes in my bathroom or my kitchen, that water actually has negative utility to me. I'm going to pay a large amount of money to a reputable plumber to come and clean it up. So all of those speak to the value is in the context that your customer is in, not in the bits or the atoms that you're trying to sell them. We could also talk about the stage thing, but I feel like I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to pause and see where you want to go from there.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm curious to dig a little bit more into the who, because I talk to a lot of clients, and some people companies struggle with kind of who is their ICP, like who is their ideal customer. Maybe the product that they thought they were building or they started to build, and their ideal customer was customer A, and then they started to get feedback from that A customer and realize that that's not the right customer. It's a completely different customer, whether it's a different industry or a different person within a company that they're supposed to be selling to. So when you think about who your customer is, do you get involved in kind of a redefinition of an ICP if there is some confusion between pricing and who, or how does that kind of work into your maybe initial analysis before you kind of give them a verdict on, are they doing the right things or how they should maybe tweak things to achieve better results?
Yeah. So yes, I do. So I would say pricing and pricing strategy, a project in that domain will unearth a lot of skeletons of poorly defined company strategy. So it's easy to come out of an offsite and say, hey, this is our strategy. We want to grow top line revenue by 20% and reduce churn by X% and penetrate the European market. Those are not a strategy. And you will, when you start to ask hard questions in a pricing project, you will determine how unsound underlying a strategy is. That's not all the time, but often it is. And so I have at the core of a model that I use, done this enough that I eventually created what I call the services model. It stands for SVCS acronym. Our marketers like our acronyms, our 5 Ps and our 3 Cs, et cetera, et cetera. And the S in the SVCS is your customers. We have to define who our customers are, going back to my water analogy, et cetera, because that is where the value lies and the competitive alternatives that are available to those people. And so one thing that you mentioned about maturing as a company is early stage, you often have what you might term a positioning hypothesis. You're like, we think that we're going to go after this customer because they'll value this thing that we do better than alternatives. And we were talking a little bit before the started recording about how I tend to focus on companies that maybe are a little bit in what you call the scale up stage, sort of 20 to 50 million ARR generally, although help companies on either side of that. because early in a company's journey, pricing tends to not be the number one thing that's going to kill them. It's going to be, do we know who our customer is, and do we actually provide value that they're going to pay anything for? So, I used to run product at a startup, and the CEO had this phrase that stuck with me. He said, running a startup is like being in a knife fight in a burning building, and you also have cancer. All three are going to kill you, but you have to deal with the knife fight first before you get out of the building, before you deal with the cancer. And pricing, much like value at any stage of a company, is always going to be a moving target and always be iterating, but it tends to be at those earliest stages. Do we know who we're going after? Can we provide value for them? And then it's things like, can we find more of those folks in a repeatable, scalable fashion to then you get some amount of traction, right? And along that way, you better be having your customers fund your business. Otherwise, you have to go to institutional capital. And I mean, there's a whole world we could talk to about, just letting investors fund a dream project. But you want to be able to, have them fund something, but it's not going to be necessarily the primary lever. That being said, even at 100, 200, I've worked with, 300 million ARR companies that, their idea of different customer segments ends at something like a firmographics, which would be by industry vertical or by company size, either revenue, number of employees. But those also tend to not be deciding factors in understanding the context that customers are in, because nobody raises their hand and says, I'm a Fortune 500 CMO when they wake up out of the morning. What product should I buy? They're dealing with some problem based upon the context or situation that's presented to them. And they have a limited number of options of how they could, address that issue given all the, constraints and tools available to them. And so we really need to figure out what those constraints are. So often there is a segmentation level element to the type of work that we do. So I could talk about this for hours. So I'll stop there and see where you want to go.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to kind of dig in a little bit on kind of your business and your ICP. I guess first thing is, I always like to hear a love person's origin story of why they started a business, because, sometimes it's easier to be an employee than it is to be a business owner. And even though you're a small business and consulting firm, there are pluses and minuses to doing that. I guess what caused you to want to kind of be, a consultant, have your own firm versus, working in a consulting firm that maybe does this or working for a normal company?
Yeah. So I was in the world of product leadership. I think, like, going back to writing my entrance essays for my MBA program, I'm pretty sure I wrote on there. I haven't looked at them in a long time, but I'm pretty sure I had on there, I want to start a business someday. I didn't even know until I went to business school that consulting as an industry existed. But at one point I left my last company. I went and traveled around the world for a year and a half. During that time, I had a lot of time on mountaintops with myself, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I was like, well, it would never get easier to start a company, so might as well do that now. If there's anything to say about an MBA program, and I'm really glad of the experience I had, but in many ways it's a 2-year training in how to get a job. So I was like, well, I know how to go through interviews and do that. So worst case, that'll happen. And given my other constraints of family responsibilities, et cetera, like now seems to be the time. And I was like, well, I want to start a product company, but I had never had an idea that I couldn't immediately shoot a bunch of holes into. Either call me pragmatic or pessimistic. I'll call myself practical, I guess, in that domain. So I was like, well, let me consult for a bit until I find a consistent problem that I could go build a product around. I guess, 6 years later, I'm still consulting. So maybe that tells you a little bit about my product sense. But when I went off, I was originally thought like, hey, there's these fractional CFOs and chief legal officers and CMOs, but there's no chief product officers. Let me go do that. Thinking it was a brilliant idea. Well, I said at the time, it's either a brilliant opportunity or about to discover why nobody else is doing this. And I built this whole marketing strategy around being a fractional CPO, and I was going to revolutionize how companies think about product strategy. And reality hit hard. It was a total disaster. It definitely was not sustainable, and there's a reason why it doesn't really exist as a category. And pivoted a couple of times until I ended up in my pricing world. But that was and have just really enjoyed the process of being able to see multiple companies, keep an industry wide lens. And obviously there's other benefits to being independent, which have been beneficial.
You get to sometimes choose your customers, right? Sometimes you pick ones that you want to work with, not the ones that you have to work with, especially once you get a little brand recognition and credibility. When you're starting out, you'll kind of take anything sometimes, but then you got to narrow down who your focus is. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about your ICP. So obviously you mentioned you're kind of targeting that 20 to 50-ish million ARR business. I guess what are some of the reasons why you get brought in? Because seemingly, if you're at that 20 to 50 million mark, you've jumped over some potholes that would potentially kill a company. You may or may not have some type of external investment, whether it's private equity or venture capital or something. So you have maybe some advisors that help you along the way. I guess what causes that level or that kind of revenue size or ARR size to be kind of your ideal customer, and what are some of the kind of normal reasons why you get brought in?
Yeah. Well, you've jumped over more than a few potholes. I don't have the exact stat, but I did look at this at one point. It's something around only 10% of SaaS companies make it to 20 million in ARR and above. So there's quite a few that don't. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I have my podcast, SaaS Scaling Secrets. Hit that like and subscribe button wherever podcasts are found, where I interview folks who have made it past that point, trying to understand, obviously it's never a smooth journey, but you've made it through there. What were the obstacles along the way to share that? So a couple of things that we see pretty commonly, once you get to sort of that scale, a few different things probably have started to happen. One is your product has gotten much more complex. And so you're either at the stage where you're multi-product, either because you've organically built product or maybe you've done some tuck-in M&A. And so now you're starting to have to manage a portfolio. Often, until you have a change of like an acquisition, folks are, hey, it's sort of working, so leave well enough alone because we don't really know. We didn't really put much thought to up front. It seems to be okay, so we don't want to break it. But then you have a portfolio. You have these theses around an acquisition of like, oh, we'll have all these synergies. We'll be able to cross-sell and do each other's base. And then people realize like, oh, we did that and nothing happened. You start talking to sales folks. They're like, yeah, well, because I've got to tell an entirely other story to bring this other deal in because it's priced differently, the value propositions don't align, et cetera. Also, like just organically, the product has probably gotten mature to a level where you are needing to break it up into more defined offers. I've talked to companies who are like, yeah, we have sort of an all-in-one package. And we kept on just adding features because customers were asking for it and they really like it. And all of a sudden, we're in 4 different Gartner Magic Quadrants and we have just a single offer. And like, that doesn't make any sense because people are shopping for X, and X is a defined category in the space, but we have one thing that's in X and Y and Z and A and B. And so we need to break that up. Also, you've grown probably to a level where you're starting to expand beyond your original target customer segment. And so while maybe value and price aligned in that original segment, it maybe is not aligning as much in the other segment. And so, those all are factors that cause people to reach out. I would say like if there's one sort of business metric, folks probably complain about or is a symptom, they're saying, hey, our net revenue retention is not going in the direction that we would like. Our acquisition is fine, but our existing customer base really not getting enough growth from those accounts. And that usually points to a strong opportunity in pricing and packaging design.
And so when you're talking about net revenue retention, you're saying more around expansion or retention of their existing customers. They're not able to retain, they're able to bring in new customers, but they're churning at a certain point. Is that kind of what you're looking at?
Well, so net revenue retention is gross retention plus or minus expansion or contraction. So expansion or contraction could be cross-selling them additional products, could be expansion within a tier. So say you have a good, better, best. I have the good plan and maybe have a seat-based model. Are those people adding and removing seats? Or are they upgrading between the good, the better, the best tiers? Are they purchasing add-ons? Or are they like removing those? And so gross retention only looks at like the logos I have on December 1st of one year versus the December 1st of the following calendar year, looking at my gross retention, but my net retention is saying, okay, I lost a bunch, but of the ones I kept, did they actually grow on top of that? So,
got it.
Kind of, I would say a good number for most SaaS companies is you want to have greater than 100% net revenue retention. And so that means that, say, if my gross retention is at 90%, that at least of those 90% of customers, they're spending enough money with me now that it's making up for all the logos I lost. And that's important because if you think about your overall top line revenue rate, like if that number sinks below 100%, all of a sudden the acquisition of new customers has to really, really work a lot harder to make up for all those dollars.
And so you're thinking that a symptom of this net revenue retention is the pricing model of the company. So if they adjust their pricing, there could be an opportunity to retain more customers, expand more customers, upsell more customers, kind of regardless of the product changing or being optimized.
So
or is it one and the same?
It could be all of the above. So, one thing that I've found is like pricing. So pricing and packaging can definitely affect the gross retention number. Why? Because if we do things correctly, we can align price to value across multiple different customer types. When you don't have this correct, companies often have sort of an average price. And that means you're massively undercharging some customers and probably overcharging others. So the ones who are getting overcharged are going to leave because they feel like they're getting screwed, and you're under monetizing others. So we see this, it's the end of the year. So I'm sure there's people who are worried about, tax season, right? We have this with our incremental tax system in the U.S., where the more money you make, your marginal tax rate increases. Why do we do that? Because wealthy people can pay more than the poor people. Whatever you think about the current tax code, that's how that's how the system works right now.
Right.
And so, versus like we don't have just a flat tax, right? So most companies are in that, like we have a flat tax, which is like, okay, like now poor people can't leave and not pay their taxes, right? But your customers can't, right? And so that, often we have that perspective. On the other side, right, is do I have paths for them to grow with us as they see more value over time? Do we have things like add-ons that they could buy from us that as they find additional use cases, whether that's maybe we charge for data connection integrations or APIs or additional storage on our systems, et cetera, that they could pay us more money for, or what's happening right now in obviously, AI is in the hypiest of hype cycles. And so, but one of the things I've often asked about is, hey, we're trying to implement some new AI-powered capabilities, leveraging these large language models. And so we want to figure out how to monetize those. So folks, one of the ways to do that is to create a new add-on for it, or to put it in one of your higher price tiers to incentivize people to upgrade there. So it's about that smart, intentional way to think about, okay, how could we monetize the value that we're providing more effectively?
Interesting. Well, I definitely want to talk about AI at some point here in a few minutes. You can't not talk about it, especially when we're talking about SaaS. But before we do that, I wanted to kind of learn a little about your business a little bit around industry specific? Like, you mentioned kind of your ICP is this 20 to 50 million ARR. Do you have different industries or specific industries that you see more opportunity for your business, or you see more people coming to you from a specific industry, whether it's like cyber or, IT infrastructure or, you name it? Are you seeing any kind of common paths or themes?
Mark Andreessen, the founder of Andreessen Horowitz, one of the original founders of Netscape, he has a quote, "Software is eating the world." So in general, no, as it pertains to my business, software is in every industry, every vertical. The foundations of pricing change, but not mostly from what I've seen within B2B software. And let me give you some clarifications on what I mean there. For folks who are interested, there's a really good book by the folks at Boston Consulting Group, BCG, called Game Changer. They laid this out in probably the most coherent way that I've ever seen it done. But if anyone's ever taken Econ 101, they probably saw, remember something about a demand curve. That works. That's a useful tool for an economist that tends to only work in highly commoditized environments. Ask any B2B sales professional, software or otherwise, what their demand curve looks like. And they're like, yeah, I don't know how you're supposed to actually get that. There are other domains of pricing, say like for pricing airline seats or hotel rooms. There's a whole world of, it's either called yield or revenue management. It goes by different terms, but and that's because you have this expiring inventory, limited amount of inventory, but it expires. And so you have all these characteristics that require you to manage that pricing. Even B2C versus B2B is different because there are some techniques that you could use in, say, B2C pricing where, because you have high transactions and no sales, you could do things like either A/B testing or rapidly moving prices that in a B2B context, you don't have enough transactional data to make those models work. And so fundamentally, it's a long-winded way of answering your question, but across the work that I do, it's a question actually I get quite often. There's really no just true difference of like B2B software companies, but this is why I stick in B2B software, because the B2C world looks quite different versus helping airlines with pricing versus auctions of ads for Google's ad network, et cetera.
I've heard about a lot of the pricing models and strategies out there for B2C, which is a very big revenue driver for like a hotel. Like you said, like they have to sell rooms. That's why there's hotels.com, which sells rooms last minute for cheaper and all that fun stuff. I guess I'm curious on the pricing and the packaging side, because you've kind of lumped or commented on both of those together. When you talk about packaging, are you also thinking about or working with the marketing team on how to communicate the product to the right customers, especially if you're introducing or building up more of a tiered structure? You've got your good, better, best kind of scenario. I'm just kind of curious if marketing is part of your process.
So, I view marketing as a key stakeholder. So usually the way I'll talk about it is product management is split into two functions, and one of them usually lives in marketing. The other one lives in their own domain and product, which is product marketing and product management, but they're basically two sides of the same coin. Product marketing usually owns positioning. And so sometimes that reports to CMO, sometimes to a chief product officer, but it differs by company. And as I said before, your pricing and packaging is a function of your positioning. And so usually the product marketing person is the owner of that. So marketing is a key stakeholder, especially if they're, own the product marketing function. That all being said, the business of pricing and packaging work is highly, sometimes painfully cross-functional. You could not make, like, CMO can't just go into a room somewhere and then come out and be like, hey, everyone, we changed our positioning of the company, because it affects everyone in the business. Right. Pricing and packaging is very similar. There was another point I wanted to make So you asked about so pricing and packaging. So let me just unpack that for folks who maybe have heard me mention it several times and like, what the hell are you talking about packaging? So when folks say pricing, often we're just focused on the price point. The number, should it be, sure, prices ends in 5s or 9s, and, do we round up to the nearest dollar, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Like, those are all fun, interesting discussions, but those tend to be at the very end of the process, and they tend to be the least important or least impactful areas that I focus on. So for software companies, we break packaging into 4 elements. Your price metric, so the unit of value I charge customers for, usually like seats or API calls or gigabytes of data transfer or stored. There's pricing model. Is it perpetual? Is it subscription? Is it pay as you go? Is it some sort of hybrid? Your offer configurations or bundles. So we mentioned good, better, best. That's a way that folks break up the choice architecture. There's others, core and more. There's persona based. There's other variations. And then finally is your price fences or price structures. How does price vary with volume, time, or identity? If you get on a bus, I pay one fee to the bus driver, but a senior citizen is going to show their senior citizen card and get a senior citizen fee, or you have a veterans discount or a student fee. Or if I go to the matinee, I'm going to pay a different price if I go at 7 p.m. to the movie theater, right? And so we have the same thing in B2B. So those elements of packaging, especially your price metric and your offer configurations, are where we spend a huge amount of the time, because those are incredibly important strategic decisions around, going back to the positioning, like who are we serving, what is the problem we solve, and does the way that we're offering our product to a customer align with the value we're promising them? Because we want to have that be one seamless path of like, this is how you get value, this is how we charge you for that value, versus like, this is the value we provide. Oh, by the way we price is based on our product architecture. So now let's have a discussion about our product architecture in order to explain how, no, we want the whole story to flow neatly. So yes, it's very much a marketing exercise from a way that we communicate that. And even to the point that if we think about software companies' pricing page, using that good, better, best frame, like one simple test, for folks could be, can your team put a label on each of those tiers saying who they're for? Okay. Because oftentimes companies can't, because they haven't really designed their pricing in a way that they say, because if we're able to do that, it should make the whole go-to-market machinery work much better. I always like to put myself in the shoes of that frontline sales rep. I'm on the phone with a customer. I have a couple of qualifying questions. That's going to say, okay, I'm going to go through this version of my demo script. At the end of that is going to be an offer that is aligned to what they told me their problems were. And that offer should be, hey, like, based upon what you said you were, I showed you all these features that are part of this offer because we've seen your movie so many times before. That's how we designed our pricing. So that gives your frontline sales reps a ton of confidence. That makes the buyer more confident and is like, oh, they really understand me and the problems and have designed this product around me, right? That's the goal of really well-designed pricing. So is that a sales exercise? Is that a marketing exercise? I think it's all of those stakeholders combined.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I guess for people listening, if they're in a business that fits your ICP, what are some things that, or maybe cracks that they're identifying that would benefit bringing somebody like you into the business? Is it simply just their net revenue retention is starting to drop, or are there other key identifiers that somebody could see and be like, oh gosh, we should probably bring in somebody like Dan to help us on the pricing and packaging side?
Yeah, I mean, there's so definitely net revenue retention is pretty important. Oftentimes, what's driving a lot of conversations these days is this AI world, because software companies have got to exist in this land that is pretty unique in the world of business, where they have almost completely negligible marginal cost to serve. No other industry has this. If I sell hammers, it costs me $2 to make this hammer. I can't have a business selling you hammers for $1 because I'm going to be out of business very quickly. But software companies could, because it was basically zero to sell, their equivalent hammer. And so companies now are seeing these giant bills go out the door to OpenAI or Anthropic or Google, Gemini, et cetera, and are having to think about that process. So that's driving a lot of conversation. Like, hey, we want to offer these products. How do we do so in a way that we don't end up upside down, et cetera.
So wait, that's more on they're trying to build into their platform more AI, and that's causing more costs to the chat GPTs and Geminis of the world, which they didn't have those costs by just offering their software. Is that
exactly?
Okay.
And the knee jerk reaction, which I think is misguided, is what we have called we in the broadest sense of this pricing world, credit-based models. So because folks are being charged by Anthropic or OpenAI by tokens, they're like, oh, well, we'll give our users X number of tokens. I'm selling you a CRM and they charge you by seats. That's super easy because you're like, how many sales folks do you have? Dan, I got 100 sales folks. Cool. We charge you $10 per user per month. So it's $1,000 per month. Super easy. I start being like, how many tokens are you going to use per user? Now I have to go into the whole explanation of what's a token? Why do I need
a token?
it?
What? Yeah.
Like, what is this thing? And so I think it's this knee-jerk reaction to maintain margins. And it tends not to work very well. But that's kind of where a lot of that conversation has been driving. So it's those things. It's, hey, we've got to a level of complexity because we've acquired a company and now need to sort of look at rationalizing our pricing across a portfolio. Or, hey, just we're having to have a lot of conversations, right? I mean, you think about what I said before. If your pricing and packaging isn't well aligned, it could really start extending your sales cycles. It could be like, hey, our sales cycles are really too long. We're having to have, to get to a closed won deal, we're having to have multiple conversations about pricing. And those are usually big symptoms. Folks, if you have like a good, better, best, it's like, hey, we've got a bunch of people who are stuck in our entry level tier, and for the life of us, we can't get anyone to upgrade. That often points to a symptom saying, hey, you guys haven't chopped up sort of price to value appropriately across those tiers. So those could all be symptoms.
Got it. Well, let's talk a little bit about AI and how I guess you're using it first in your business to, make yourself more efficient, et cetera. And then how are you using it at all when engaging with customers, whether it's, simple data ingestion to give you a little bit more faster kind of analysis, or do you have like models that you use to, develop your pricing strategies, for your customers?
That's a lot of questions at once. Is there any particular place you want to start?
Let's start with you. Let's start with you and your business.
Yeah. I'm a huge nerd, and I spend all my time, trying to learn about the world of AI. So I'm a heavy user of kind of all the different models. I would say there's a few different areas that might be worth clicking on. So let me just lay them out and I'll see, if anything's interesting to drill down on. So I think the first is just the ability of tools like, I think at this point in time, and probably be wrong, in 6 days. So don't quote me, but Gemini's deep research is incredibly impactful to getting up to speed on any industry or topic. It's been sort of my shopping companion in a personal life. Like, hey, I've got to figure out a new rain shell to buy for hiking, or I've got to buy an ice machine. Like, I don't know anything about these. Like, go figure out everything I need to know about this space, but can use that for very deep technical sort of B2B markets and what is needed there. I think the other thing is, anything that you are using AI for, I don't see this talked about much, so maybe this would be a helpful tip for folks, is I'm not usually a process person. Like, the idea of like writing SOPs and process documentation does not get me out of bed in the morning. In fact, it makes me want to go take a nap, if anything.
Yeah.
But what I found is these systems are awesome for, hey, I've just gone through a process. You're a podcaster, so I'll use the podcast analogy. I've gone through a process of creating promotional content for an episode, generate me an SOP for this process that we just went through. We took a bunch of turns and I corrected you. So you have a better sense after that conversation, that chat thread, what it is that we did together. So systematize that, because I'm going to do that again. So the next time I'm processing the next episode, I'm just using the podcast example. Anybody in any business can apply this to anything that they do repeatedly. I start with that prompt. Hey, I'm creating promotional content for this podcast episode. Here's my SOP. And then we run through that process again, say, okay, hey, we're at the end of this. What can I improve in that? You have the document. We just went through this. How can I iterate and improve that? So there's a brilliant AI engineer, Andre Karpathy, one of the ex-OpenAI. He was the head of Tesla's AI program, self-driving program. But he had this whole talk about English as a new programming language. And I think I think there's a lot of ink being spilled around agents and automation platforms. And yeah, those things are great. And I think they're cool. And maybe in 5 years, that'll all work the way people are promising that they'll work. But right now, you can pretty much encapsulate programs in written language, much like you would for a human. So if you're training a new hire, you have a bunch of onboarding material. Think about it in that way. Like you'd have onboarding material to bring up a new executive assistant or a new, marketing analyst, et cetera, et cetera. You say, hey, this is what we care about. These are our brand guides. These are all the details that we want to make sure of any social media posts that go out. And then, like that person, they're going to make mistakes. You're like, oh, the process wasn't clear there. Instead of always correcting that same mistake, using that, putting that back into have the AI engage with it, understand, oh, hey, this wasn't clear. We spent a lot of time iterating on this point. This is why it's confusing, because it wasn't really clear what you wanted. So let's nip that in the bud so you never have to go through that again. So I think that process alone has just been monumentally helpful for me. And it's something I never would have done if I was someone having to write and follow those SOPs step by step.
I'm in like that. You're right in my wheelhouse, because I'm in the process of documenting some processes and some SOPs on some things to make it a little more clear on how I do what I do for clients and things like that. And to your point, I'm not gonna. I put it off because I don't want to do it, but I'm like, oh, I need to leverage AI and have them do all the grunt work. I get to do kind of the fun work and the tweaking and all that fun stuff. Fascinating. So that helped me. So you helped one person with that information. I'm definitely going to leverage that probably this weekend for sure. And then I guess real quick on anything that you're using, or I guess when you're talking to customers, is AI? Does AI enter the conversation around, hey, you should implement some type of AI, kind of what we just talked about around the tokenization of using, the large language models and that pricing structure? Like, is that part of your analysis to recommend kind of product enhancements, or is that too deep outside of your pricing kind of remit?
Yeah. So for most of the work that I do, I usually take as a given, hey, this is the product we have, or this is the product we're building. That is not to say that I think one underappreciated factor around willingness to pay research, whether that's quantitative or qualitative, can be very impactful in helping to inform a product roadmap. There's really good evidence that companies that monitor, measure, assess willingness to pay for things that they're thinking about building are more successful, because ultimately, if folks, it's one thing to say, hey, should we build this? Or if we built it, would you want it? And if we built it and charged you another $10 a month for it, would you want it? Those are two very different questions. And so if I have a set of capabilities that are on my roadmap and I can't build them all, trying to understand relative willingness to pay for those capabilities is a really helpful way of prioritizing. But that being said, I'm not usually helping direct their core product strategy. They've already sort of taken that as an input.
Got it. Well, Dan, this has been a lot of fun. There's a lot more that we could probably dig into, and maybe we'll do that on another podcast. But I guess as we kind of round things out here, we're recording this episode on Thanksgiving Eve in 2025. So if we jumped on a podcast a year from now, from your business perspective, like what's maybe one or two things that you're really trying to knock out of the park in the next 12 months?
Big questions. I feel like my ability to forecast all these AI improvements is getting worse and worse every day because this feels like I'm sure I'm not alone in this. The ground is continually getting swept out from under me.
Yep.
I think there is, if I would say anything, I would say the ability to significantly scale my own practice through implementation and use of these tools is primary goal. And so, the more I can sort of outsource what I used to outsource to other humans into these SOPs and systems, I think there's an incredible opportunity. I mean, I've been in technology my entire career. I don't think it's an understatement to say this is the most exciting time in technology perhaps ever. I think there's massive, opportunity and, maybe some cause for concern and drizzled in there. But I think if you're ambitious and you're curious, there's just capabilities that are just waiting to be tapped that have never been available to folks who are running companies.
Yeah, definitely not at this scale or at this, price point, because everybody can use ChatGPT for free right now, right? Unless and so, yeah, it's just a very interesting time to be alive, both on an exciting note, but also on a scary note, because, there's always the doom and gloom scenario of AI and all that fun stuff. So, awesome. Well, no, I appreciate that. Let's kind of round this thing out with the 3-pack of questions that I ask every guest. First question is always the book question. So what's a book that you've found helpful or kind of influential in your business journey?
Yeah, I would say the book I probably recommend to most folks. So, there's you do this enough that I started to get a bunch of folks referring their friends to me to say, hey, like so-and-so left, their company or got left and is looking to go off on their own sort of consulting journey. How do they do that? I would say the number one resource I always point folks to is a book by a gentleman named David A. Fields called The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients. So very helpful tools of the trade, very pragmatic, focused way to think about how to position and create a firm that you can, a consulting firm that you could be successful with. So I've been highly influential in my journey and definitely recommend it to others.
Very cool. I had not heard about that book, but I will have to check it out. Awesome. Question 2 here. What is your favorite thing to do outside of work?
Take my dog for walks in the park.
Got it. Well, you're downtown Austin, or you're South Austin, so there's probably a lot of parks pretty close.
Yep.
Awesome. Last question here. Favorite vacation spot?
I'm a little bit weird on vacations. I tend to not go to the same place twice.
Okay.
I tend to batch up my trips into large 1-2 month, sometimes year and a half trips around the world. So I'll say the most recent trip we did was we spent a month in northern Italy in the mountains of the Dolomites doing like a co-living situation. So that was super awesome. It was a tiny little town no one's ever heard of, but it was fantastic.
No, that's awesome. My wife and I spent a few days in Italy a year and a half ago, and we are planning on doing some type of a live work in some either Italian town in Tuscany or someplace in Portugal, maybe by the ocean or something like that. So,
yeah, I think Lisbon is on our target list for next year. So
cool. Awesome. Well, Dan, man, if people want to learn more about what you do, or maybe they're listening to this and they're, having a net revenue retention problem and they may want to use your services, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn. So happy to connect with folks there. Just tell me you heard me on the podcast and in your outreach note. So I can separate it from the rest of the LinkedIn spam. Also, you can reach out to me on my website, producttranquility.com.
Awesome. Dan, man, really appreciate the time, and thank you for being a guest.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it.
I hope you found at least one actionable insight from this episode of the Growth Capital Podcast, your one-stop shop for insights from private equity leaders, CEOs, and startup entrepreneurs on starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, as well as the role having the right talent plays in growing a successful business. It would be greatly appreciated if you would rate and review this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop us a comment so we can expand the audience of this podcast. Thank you for all your support, and don't forget about upcoming episodes dropping every Tuesday.